Yeah, my name's Mick O'Leary. I will be speaking, well, John Ballas was due to speak tonight, but he couldn't make it, so he asked me to fill in for him. My background's electrician by trade, worked with batteries for a lot of years when I was with Telstra, and I also work with solar and batteries and storage battery systems. Now, I'll start off by saying these two batteries here, the top one was developed for the home storage market about 10 years ago. It's a 10 kilowatt hour battery. And the bottom one was developed for electric vehicles. Well, the battery has actually been in electric vehicles since about 1968. But these later versions, that's a higher voltage. They're between 300 and 400 volts generally. The top one's a 48 volt battery. And Gridedge is the supplier, the Australian supplier for sodium nickel batteries or FiAM batteries. And John Ballas is the manager and owner of Gridedge. So I'll just move on here. Now, they're used in many situations. Obviously, on the top there, you can see energy storage, telecommunications. There's the home battery plug and play system there. There's a solar trailer there where it's got a 10 kilowatt battery inside there, and it runs off about 3 solar panels. More energy storage there. These big energy storage units, they can supply about store about 1.4 meg and be charged and discharged in around 20 minutes. So that's quite high power. Buses and railways as well. And this is only quite recently in railways, I think in the last 5 years or so. But they're actually, with molten salt, they're generally they're considered probably the safest technology on the market. So sodium nickel based, which is basically table salt. There's no toxic materials, and obviously salt's a very abundant material. It's probably one of the most abundant materials in the world. I think I was reading somewhere if you all the salt in the world would cover the surface of the earth in 500 feet of salt. So it's very abundant. What's that, sorry? Yeah. So we'll talk about this battery here, which is about 10 years old. It was developed by FiAM for the home energy market. It's got a depth of discharge of 80%. It's got no explosive gases. It's quite compact, lightweight, fully recyclable, and it operates between minus 20 and 60 degrees. So it can, basically work out in the snow or the outback. It doesn't degrade. So as it goes from a molten state to a solid state and back again, it doesn't lose any of its properties. And you can actually easily add capacity by paralleling them up together. Here's a bit of a comparison chart between other battery technologies. You've got, I'll just let you read that if you like. You can see the operating temperatures of the others, not as great as it's not as big a window as the molten salt. And some of the others, as you heat them, as the outside temperature gets hotter, their performance drops. And in the case of a lead acid battery, you can actually ruin a lead acid battery if it's out, if it gets too warm. So also number of cycles is very good. Generally, the molten salt battery can operate around 6,000 cycles before it gets to its end of life. There's a bit of speculation on that. Some of the literature says 4,500. It charges reasonably quickly, and virtually no maintenance. Okay, so here's some more characteristics. So on the left here, you've got a cell. That's a 2.5 volt cell, and inside there you've got a nickel rod, and that's your anode, and that's got a ceramic sort of like tube around it, so it's encapsulated in ceramic, and the salt is in that tube, and then you heat that up to a temperature of around 270 degrees Celsius, and the sodium ions are released through, they permeate through the ceramic wall, and on the outside you've got a stainless sheath, and that is your anode. So, and that will generate about 2.5 volts. And as when it gets to temperature, and you start charging, the ions go one way. So they go from within the ceramic tube to the outside, and then as it discharges, it does the opposite. So the ions go back. So that's how it actually works. So here's basically how it's made. You've got obviously thermal insulation, you've got your heating elements, you've got your cells, and you've got a battery management unit here. What the battery management unit does is when you get a brand new battery, for instance, you put it on charge, and the first thing that happens is it heats up to 270 degrees. Then the battery sort of switches on and goes into operation, and that's controlled by the battery management. You've got a little screen, a little LCD screen, and it will rotate over, and it will show the state of the charge of the battery, the charging rate, or discharging rate, and also the state of charge, capacity, so it might be, in percentage, and what else does it show? And also the charge voltage on it as well. So you might charge it up, you might put 57 volts on to charge it, and the battery management will just take care of that. So you don't need an outside battery management unit. So in America, they did, so the American Army, I think, did a abuse testing of the sodium nickel battery, where they submerged it in salt water. So they were trying to actually put it into an unsafe state, because the battery, it doesn't gas or build up pressure at all. And so what they did with it, they exposed it to fire, and they shot it with bullets, and they did a high-speed crash test on it. They overcharged it. They skewered it with a big rod here on the left to try and make it unsafe, and then put it in, dropped it from a great height, and submerged it in salt water, and nothing really. It didn't go into a dangerous state or give off any toxic gases or catch fire, and even when they lit it on fire with petrol, the fire just burned out. So as you can see, it's a very safe technology. It can be actually put anywhere. It can be indoor or outdoor. It doesn't really have any restrictions on it at all because of the safety. So you don't need, if you cart it, you don't need signs and so forth. So no, this is one of John's slides. So no battery is perfect. Each technology has its trade-offs, and the molten salt's no different. It's you wouldn't really want to put the home storage molten salt battery in a vehicle. You could do, and it would perform fairly well, I think, but you would be better off using the one that's actually designed for electric vehicles. And here's some examples of some vehicles where the molten salt battery is used. So they're mainly in commercial vehicles. I don't really know why. but they've been used in commercial vehicles since 1968. So the battery was actually developed in the Second World War by a scientist called George Otto Erb, who was developing a battery for the V2 rocket. And that was, the war finished before the V2 rocket was used, and the Americans got the technology, and I think they sold it to the Brits, who on-sold it to the South Africans, and the South Africans bought out a battery called a Zebra battery, and used them in vehicles from 1968. And I think the Zebra batteries are still going today. You can actually still buy the Zebra batteries. So here's some more examples of commercial vehicles. These are all in Europe. There's no vehicles in Australia, as far as I'm aware, that actually use molten salt. Well, when I say that, in cars, there's a Tindo bus in Adelaide that used about 8 molten salt batteries, and that was around since about 2006. So here's some more examples. This is in Europe, they're using molten salt batteries in more and more vehicles. That's another example. There's some more. That one's from 2009. There's some more. John set these slides up. He thought that most of you would want to see, more of the electric vehicle applications. Here's the Tindo bus. Now, this was built in 2006. First, the batteries have done extremely well in this bus. The people that ran the city council, when they met up with John, they were very impressed by the battery, because what happened was the bus ran for the first year or so, it was very overcrowded, so they carried a lot more weight, and they thought that would put a big strain on the batteries. And when they took it off the road to put some wheelchair access and things on it, it was off the road for a couple of years. And they thought the batteries would have needed changing by sitting idle for a couple of years, but the batteries were fine, so they just put them back in the bus. So it's ran very well. They're very happy with it. They want to develop more electric buses. They actually contacted us and had some old batteries, and they gave them to us, and we've got them at our workshop down at Ottaway. Here's some more applications here. Here's buses working in the snow. Here's an example of a vehicle with a zebra battery in there. There's some tram. Here's a solar trailer. I've got a very similar trailer to this one. If it's might even be this one actually. This was built about 5 years ago, probably a little bit longer. It's got a 10 kilowatt hour battery in there, a 200 amp. Just runs off 3 solar panels, and I used to take it around to fetes and things like that and charge up mobile phones and what have you. Here's a little home energy unit. This has got a 10 kilowatt hour battery in the bottom and an inverter, 48 volt inverter in the top there, hybrid inverter. And one of the other features about the battery is you can plug the battery in using a Modbus. It's got a Modbus port in there. You can plug the battery into the inverter, and the inverter knows the charge of the battery and vice versa. So you can actually have the battery control the inverter, and it's very accurate. So the battery tells the inverter what charge it is, and the inverter gives it the optimum charge. And the other feature is it can draw very high currents for quite a long period, about 50 amps for about 5 hours. So you can run sort of virtually the whole house and put a big load on it, and it doesn't degrade the battery. So
how big is that?
it's about 4 foot high, I suppose. It can be, you can parallel them up, you can parallel the inverters in the top to give you more capacity. So if you've got if you want, you put a 3 kilowatt inverter on the top, and if you want to double it, you can put 6 kilowatts, and then you can double the size of the battery, so you can actually expand the system very easily. And it doesn't matter how old the original battery is, it'll be compatible with the newer battery, where you can't quite do that with lithium, or lead acid for that matter. This is more of a plug and play unit, and also the colour controller there, the screen up the top there, will show you what the solar's doing, how much solar is going into the battery, what the battery is, the rate of charge. So these batteries can be charged at 40 amps and without any harm, and so they can actually charge quite quickly, also, so you've got all the information about exactly what the system's doing, and that's also online as well. So you can just connect it to the internet and check it on your phone, and also change settings on the internet if you want. So you generally set the system up so the solar runs the house, and the excess solar will charge the battery, and once the battery's full, it'll send the excess charge out to the grid. Here's an example of so with these home storage batteries, they can be coupled up into a cabinet and give you all these. You've got 40 odd kilowatt hours there. So you might want to run or whatever, a big standalone system or whatever. And you don't have to worry too much about the temperature inside. You just need a fan. You don't need a proper, air conditioning unit. Here's another example here. See, these are deployed all over the world, on islands and basically anywhere. They're not. There's not a lot in Australia at the moment. They'd be ideal for the outback. There's a lot of people interested in putting them in the outback because of their ability to handle heat. And that's pretty much it. So, thank you. Cheers. So, you got a question?
Is it fair to say that in the outback, because it's already hot, you'd spend less of your electricity heating the battery?
That's exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So you would heat the battery a lot quicker, but you actually only need to heat the battery once.
But
So
then
you-
you've got to maintain the heat, right?
No, the battery will maintain its own heat. So
With some things.
yeah, with itself, yeah.
Yeah,
So
well, the energy comes from somewhere though.
yeah,
Charging,
from the
discharging.
yeah, that's right. Well, what it'll do is once it's fully charged, you'll slowly discharge through itself.
Yes.
So it uses around about 100 watts. But when you're actually charging the battery, so if you charge any battery or discharge any battery, you'll generate heat, right? But the heat you generate is actually used in this battery. So while it's sitting idle, it actually uses around about, I think, about 90 watts to maintain the 270 degrees. But while it's working,
But if it's
It's
55
running.
degrees outside in the desert, then it might be using less watts.
that's right, yes, you're exactly
It's more
right.
efficient in a hot climate.
That's right, it is, yeah.
Australia is probably
Yeah,
perfect for that.
yeah, and the battery management system looks after that, so you don't have to worry about it. It'll sit. I mean, the battery in my trailer, I've had it for probably 4 years, and I've never seen the temperature vary between 1 or 2 degrees, regardless of whether it's freezing cold in the morning or stinking hot 40-degree day.
Do you notice a less efficiency of payback from the power that goes in versus what comes out for the heating losses, for example?
You could measure it. But you lose it. So you lose efficiency in your inverter by inverting. Obviously, probably 10% or whatever, and then you lose it. Lose a little bit putting it in, and lose a little bit putting out, bringing it out. But no greater than any other battery technology as far as when it's charging and discharging, to my knowledge, anyway. So, yeah.
Does this mean that since it's using some of its internal energy to keep itself hot, does it slowly go flat?
Yeah, what'll happen is, so if you just left it, it'll just use its internal energy. So if you say it's 100% charged, you wake up the next morning and you might have 90%, and then it will slowly discharge because it's maintaining its own heat. Then when it gets down, then when it can't maintain its own heat, it will just switch itself off. And then what you do is you just charge it, and the first thing it does is heat itself up to its optimal temperature and then switches on. So, but the battery management system works really well. I've never had an issue with any of that. Yep. Yep, sure.
So, pardon. I've heard that it's very expensive compared with other batteries.
Yeah, it's
Is that so?
well, it's around about probably a bit over $1,000 a kilowatt hour. So it was comparable to lithium. It's a little bit it's dearer than lithium now because lithium has obviously come down in price. But when you look at cycle life and degradation, it's quite economical because your other technologies will start to degrade after a certain amount of cycles, especially if they're abused. I mean, lead acid batteries especially, if you don't use them properly, then they'll degrade very quickly, as a lot of people in this room would know. So in that sense, that you're going to get 6,000 cycles out of it, and I, like with my battery, I haven't noticed any degradation over cycle life. But then again, I don't. The one in the solar trailer doesn't cycle very often.
And that damage testing
Yeah.
program that you showed, was the battery able to function after
Yeah.
any or all of?
Yeah, it can. So when they dropped it, because it's got strings inside of it, but you've got to remember there is ceramic, so the strings are, or the cells have got the ceramic tubes, and they will break if you drop it, and so you could lose a couple of cells, but then the battery will still operate even with broken cells because they're all paralleled up together. So it will function, but it might function to 50% or whatever. If you short, it's got a fuse in it, about 200 amp fuse. You can just short the battery out. We'll just blow the fuse. It won't, have a massive arc or anything. It just blows, and then you just replace it. So if you just submerge it in salt water, you'll blow the fuse, and then it'll just sit there. But it doesn't give off any toxins and so forth. Yeah.
Thank
You
you.
said 6,000 cycles. What would be the degradation up to that point or at that point?
Well, I don't really know what the degradation is, but I would assume that your ceramic cells would maybe eventually become more brittle over time. So the end of life, I don't really know whether they don't sort of degrade as in you won't lose function, but if you crack a cell, it won't perform, obviously. So that's generally what they mean. But I mean they did originally say when I bought the trailer a few years ago it was around about 4,500 cycles, but they upgraded that to 6,000 cycles in literature. It was bought out in the last year or so.
6,000, what's that in like daily charge?
Well, it depends on how you use it. That's right. So if you cycled it every day, yeah. But I think they generally refer to a cycle as a full charge to a full discharge.
I've got a question to add to that. Mostly you might be oscillating between fully charged and say 60% charged. That's not a cycle.
No, I don't think so. And it's a bit of a debatable topic, actually, especially with lithium batteries, where they say, might say lithium battery's got 4,000 charges. Well, depending on the algorithm that they use, they might just mean a cycle is slightly up, slightly down, but the true definition of a cycle, I think, should be actually fully charged to fully discharged.
That might never happen.
Well, it might never happen. That's right, but. Yeah, but it's a bit of a grey area, cycling.
Because otherwise all you're doing is counting days. So
that's right, yeah.
It's 19 years.
Well, I think if you would try to get a warranty on your Tesla or something, if you said, this battery's only operating at 50% of when I bought it, 2 years ago, they would probably look inside and say, well, hang on, you've cycled it 4,000 times. To get out of paying the warranty or something. No, I don't know, but that, probably not. I don't know, but So as I say, it's hard to find information about cycling. Yeah.
One of those slides said life was greater than 20 years. On one of the slides.
Yeah.
A young person's battery.
Well, They generally say about 20. Yeah, I don't know why they say that because generally they will last 20 years. But the home storage battery hasn't been on the market for 20 years. It's only was bought out about 10 years ago. But
Technology's been around for a long time.
since 1943, somewhere in there. Yeah.
What sort of weight and fragility?
So.
Can you repeat the question?
He asked me what sort of weight and fragility. So the 10 kilowatt battery weighs about 104 kilo, and they say don't drop them, but they're fairly robust. They're very well, they're hermetically welded. And they're all stainless. They're actually really put together well. So you probably could drop it from a small height, and it might not damage it, but you wouldn't want to try it. Yep. So.
In your opinion, you obviously done a lot more research than all of us. I've already just heard of it. What would be your impression as to why they haven't been used in commercial EVs, like smaller EVs?
Small EVs. I don't know. It might, they haven't been in Australia for very long. So they were used in mainly in telecommunications as a backup battery. So they went from a sort of commercial space so a lot of other technologies go from a domestic space to a commercial space. So they went from a commercial space to a domestic space, and they've only been in the domestic market, as I said, for 10 years or so, and only been in Australia for 10 years. So, Yeah, FIAM's a very old company, and they weren't. So John Ballas actually went overseas and spoke to them and said, "Hey, I want to bring these batteries into Australia." So it wasn't so much them wanting to be in Australia, but he saw the potential, especially in the outback and places like that with Australian heat. Thought that'd be ideal. So, yeah.
So the the energy density was 10 kilowatt hours for about 100 or so kilos.
Yeah.
And how, like the physical cubic mass of that 100 kilos, like what's its footprint in terms of physical size for storage?
It's about, okay, so it's about the size of an esky. It's about, yeah, that's big.
Just under 500.
Yeah, about half, 500. Yeah, yeah.
Don't they fit in the 600 mil wrap?
Yeah, they do, yes. So about 500
And the
wide.
voltage per cell?
So the cell voltage is about 2.8 volts, bit the same as a lead acid battery. So, yeah. So they have 24 cells, 2 volt cells, and about 6 strings. So the cells are in strings, and they have DC to DC charges in each string. So there's 6 actual charges inside, and the battery management system will deal with balancing the strings.
Do they vent any products?
They don't. Do they what? Sorry.
They, like, you said hermetically welded, but are they fully sealed?
Yeah, they're fully sealed. Yeah, yeah. They don't vent anything. Yeah, yeah. They don't build up any pressure.
So do they just expand and contract?
No, no, not. That's why. That's what makes them pretty safe, because they don't build up pressure. That's why you're allowed to have them inside your home. Actually,
Well, what is the result of overcharging?
if you overcharge them, you can overcharge them without without damage. I don't know if you overcharged them over a prolonged period of time whether you would eventually damage the strings, but they're fairly robust with regards to overcharging and discharging. You can discharge them down to 0, and it won't do any damage. That's to my knowledge anyway.
How much would it cost for 500 amp hours at 48 volt?
500 amp hours. Well, the 10 kilowatt hour battery is 200 amps. So you buy 2 of those. So you want 500 amps capacity, yeah. So you buy 2 10 kilowatt hour batteries to cover.
$2,000.
Oh no, cost. Oh, that sort of varies on, but generally, I don't know, a bit over $1,000 a kilowatt hour, I suppose, would be the general cost per kilowatt hour. Yeah. So,
what's its shelf life, and do they rupture when you overcharge them?
no, they don't. No, not to my knowledge. They don't rupture when you overcharge. And the shelf life, you could. So, if you were to let the battery discharge fully, it would sit there for years and it wouldn't degrade. So, also the same token, if you switched the battery off, so there's a little switch on the side that just turns the battery off, and it'll hold its charge, and so yeah, it will stay in that state of charge, cool down. And then when you heat it up again, or when you charge it and it heats up to the temperature and switches on, it'll maintain that charge. So, yep.
Any of those vehicles, the cars, you may not know this, but do you know what size packs are in them or what range they got from any of those little cars?
No, well, I don't really, because, but I assume they would just behave like a lithium 10 kilowatt hour battery as far as range and the power to the energy to weight ratio is better than lithium, depending on who you talk to, but generally speaking. So.
And what about the rate of discharge? Like, I know talking to John, he was a bit concerned that, like putting in a high powered car, they might be able to draw as much power out as quickly, or what effect that might have?
Yeah,
Those vehicles were either small or
yeah,
slow
yeah,
to recharge.
that's right. Yeah, and I would assume it would be the diesel equivalent of a electric vehicle. So
Sally nearly preempted my question, most of it. I'm looking now at the car version, what C rating, if it's rated at I think what you said, 8
Yeah.
9 kilowatt hours,
yeah,
then
Yeah.
what can you draw from it? Can you pull 3C or 5C
yeah,
or 10C?
yeah. Well, with this battery, with a 10 kilowatt hour battery, you can pull 50 amps over 5 hours, so you can discharge it quite quickly.
50 amps isn't much for an electric car.
No, so I don't know what.
Like 1,000 amps. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if you probably could perhaps go higher, but that's in the specs. They say that you can pull that. But
Electric car battery, because they earlier on they said there was one for the house and one for the car.
yeah, I'm asking about the car.
no, I'm not sure. But
It's about 300 volt. You said those quite a high voltage.
they do run at a higher voltage. I don't know. Peter might know what the Tindo bus
The Tindo bus's battery is 370 volts,
370.
and there's a 22 kilowatt battery that's 620 volts.
Mm.
That would be what we put in a bus.
Yeah, I would say the ones designed for the car would probably run a whole lot, a much higher current than the home storage one, I'd assume.
If you double the voltage.
Yeah,
then
that's
you-
right, double half the current, yeah.
Right, do we have any more
Yeah.
questions?
Any special?
Any special, you'll have to, well, you talk to John Ballas, because he might put a deal together. Yeah.
All right, well,
No, thanks for listening, and hopefully.
thanks so much.